Hola, Soul family. So I'm going live here on IG because I just tried to go live on Facebook and I was restricted from going live on Facebook. I got a warning saying you are restricted from going live. Uh, I'm a little surprised, but I'm actually not in some ways because I've been censored so much on social media, and I know a lot of us have who have voices that counter the narrative, the status quo, the narrative that's propagated by the corporate media and all of their state powers. So no surprise there, and thankfully I can at least go live here on Instagram because I want to share some thoughts, and I'll just cross-pollinate it later for those of you who are on Facebook or follow my YouTube channel. So I just wanted to share some reflections on the Freedom Convoy, all the truckers who are converging in Canada. And this is just my own humble perspective. If you don't know, I'm in Costa Rica, so I'm not on the ground there. I'm not an organizer. I'm not a very experienced activist and have a lot of experience in protests and such. So I'm just going to share my humble opinion as far as I see things through living a very spiritual life and studying media information at university and just being a student of history quite passionately. So, yesterday, before I went to bed, I had the amazing opportunity to actually witness, or watch rather, one of the kind of unofficial press conferences with three of the organizers of the Freedom Convoy. And they described there being about 20 organizers total. And it was an amazing interview, and it's quite hard to find this. I only found it on Twitter. If you go over to my public Facebook page, Darren Austin Hall, you'll find it there. It's one or two posts down now, I think. And it's an amazing 45-minute interview with three individuals. The woman, Tamara Lick, I think that's her name, or Litch, who started the GoFundMe campaign. She's actually Métis, so she's indigenous. And it's amazing to hear her speak because she actually talks about how she's been talking to a lot of clan mothers, indigenous elders, to center their voices in this movement and to center the need for indigenous peoples getting access to clean water, because of course Prime Minister Trudeau has failed to do that time and time and time again, and they call him out on that specifically. So I thought that was rather interesting. And then the gentleman, I think his name is Dennis something, he hails from Toronto. He's Jewish, and they specifically denounce the white supremacists and the extremists who are trying to obviously just derail the movement. And this is the thing, we're seeing a lot of noise being spewed out by the legacy corporate media right now and the state powers, and it's the same thing they always do to any authentic movement. And they're very duplicitous, they're very cunning, and what they do is they try and work on these primal control switches in us, and they bring up the race card, they bring up the hate group card. They try and feed on our emotions so that we do not think clearly about the situation. And unfortunately, it works a lot of the time because it's just so easy to manipulate people when you get them afraid, and you get them afraid that there's going to be some kind of violence, especially against people who are considered weak or disenfranchised. The real tragedy about this is though people are trying to do their best and seemingly trying to step up and shoot down what they see as racist and bigotry, they're actually enabling racism and they're enabling white supremacy, because if you follow accounts like People of Color for Freedom Convoy, POC for the number 4 Freedom Convoy on Instagram, and you're just in touch with some of your friends in the Sikh community, especially who have been big time helping out the truckers, you'll see that there's actually a tremendous amount of diverse voices, indigenous peoples, people from all kinds of nationalities who are behind this movement. In fact, this movement is profoundly unifying, and a lot of my friends who've been on the ground in Ottawa are saying it's incredible what they're witnessing, really emotional, beautiful, loving vibes. And to me, that's the essence of the movement that they're trying to put forth. These three organizers say that this is not a movement that's associated with any political party. In fact, they denounce both the Liberals and the Conservatives, and they say they've rejected any politicians, and many of them have come forward to try and speak with them and use their platform, and they've rejected all of them. They're very against politicians in general. And again, this is just a dismantling of this whole shitty narrative that they're trying to spew and basically possess the movement with by calling it a white supremacist, white nationalist, conservative, right-wing, alt-right, whatever, and it's just not the case. I'm not saying that those elements aren't probably present in some way on the fringe, but if you follow the account I mentioned, Talk for Freedom Convoy, it's an amazing account. It's got like almost over 30,000 followers now, and what's incredible about this account is you're seeing just eyewitness testimony on the ground of how protesters deal with these extremists. They're actually tracking them, they're aware of them, and they're very aware that the government uses the tactic of agent provocateurs. It's a tried and tested tactic. It's one of the most corrupt tactics because it totally exploits our naivete, and it works on some of our most primal emotions and feelings. And it's been, I mean, I studied this at university, these kinds of tactics that that they use. And when I was at university in the early 2000s, there was a G8 in Quebec, in Montebello, where, I don't know if people remember this, but it was discovered that the government had sent in undercover black bloc protesters to infiltrate and incite the crowds into violence, because then they have a justification to just like crush the protests. And they use this all the time. Like, if you follow journalists like Glenn Grunwald, he's been covering actually how the Jan 6 like insurrection narrative in America, people don't realize the FBI had such a massive hand in organizing that, like to the highest levels of like paying the protesters, funding them. They pretty much like created the whole thing, and then they entrap people and say, oh, it was your fault. That's just bullshit. And then you look at the Proud Boys, even their leader was an FBI informant. Like, it's just so duplicitous, and it's such a like distortion of our reality. So it's really hard for people to get a handle on this, but we have to be super aware that our government uses these tactics. That's not to say that there aren't actual neo-Nazis and white supremacists and white nationalists. There are, and if you follow some of these protesters on the ground, they're aware of this, and they're tracking these people, and they're trying to keep them out of the movement. They're trying to get them off airtime. But one thing you'll see is they constantly say is that the media follows those people around. It's like they're giving them more and more airtime to try and sully the movement. Do not be naive about this. The media is in collusion with the corporations, and the corporations run the state. And it's all about holding their own narrative and their own agenda. And what they do not want to happen is a grassroots movement that's going to unify people over all these lines of race. And this is what the organizers, if you watch in the press conference, that's what they say they're trying to do. And there's a lot more information coming out that they're very organized. They've set up stations all over Ottawa, and they're in there for the long haul for weeks and months. And I hope, by the sounds of it, they're very skillful, and they know this is what happens. This is what happened in Standing Rock, which was such a great protest movement in America. And I remember seeing the woman whose land Standing Rock was on in Toronto, and she spoke, and she actually shared that they had to move the location of Standing Rock to a secret location that they hardly told anyone, because what ended up happening was that the government sent in protesters and activists undercover, pretending to be protesters and well-meaning activists, who would then start spreading gossip all around the camp to like create disunity and destroy it from the inside out. So they found this out, they profiled all these people, kicked them out, and then moved the location. People, like, you have to be aware of the tactics of the state. This is how low they go. And it's been really, really challenging to watch so many people just falling for this, for just watching a global news segment or the CTV and assuming that these people have our best interests in mind. It's ridiculous. And, the other thing I just want to mention is the whole, like, Russia propaganda, because I know CBC is trying to say this is a Russian movement, that there's Russian influence in this. Look, when I was at university, we studied McCarthyism very deeply, and some of you may not remember what McCarthyism is, but it's basically the US government used the Red Scare, the idea of Russia as a boogeyman, for years and years and years over the American population, to make them afraid that there was this like communist subterfuge happening within American civil society, and it was bullshit. It was propaganda. They were just manipulating people's minds. And the fact that they keep pulling out this card, it's like, people, just Google McCarthyism, like, know that this is a tactic. They've used this before. Like, anytime I see Russia, I immediately know it's bullshit. In fact, there's much graver dangers in the world than Russia. But that's just a tactic. People should just be aware of that. The other thing I want to mention is, look, like, people are decrying, oh, there's these extremists, and if there's extremists at the protest, then you're all extremists. Look, if you study like the 1960s, the civil rights movements, any rights movement, there's always a struggle. Like unity doesn't just happen. It doesn't just people decide, oh, we're gonna have a protest movement for unity, and then boom, it's like no problem. Like, do you remember Occupy? Do you remember what these movements have to go through? Do you know how divided we are and how divided the media is just programming us 24/7 to be divided on everything from sports teams to gender to race to religion to politics. Like it's just, we're in a quagmire of just absolute divisiveness. And that's why, the organizers say in their press conference, they're like, just turn off the media, and we really have to take that to heart. This is like the only way we're going to heal this is by turning off all this propaganda to divide us and realize that, yes, on the ground, there's going to be a struggle. Not everyone's going to have the same voices. Some people are going to have different ideas politically, but we have to talk. We have to first like just gather and start like respecting each other and listening to each other's voices and having boundaries. Yeah, if there are extremists, you keep them on the fringe. You do not give them voices. And this is what needs to happen. And this is what needs to be the reality of the focus, is that there are a lot of incredible, like immense, beautiful, powerful, unifying intentions happening on the ground. And we need to amplify those. Why are we focusing on this small fringe? Even if that fringe is there and they're trying to infect and overtake the movement, the only way we're going to really push back is actually unify and amplify the voices that are positive on the ground. I mean, to me, this is also like a subtle form of racism and also just judgmentalism and extremism, that we would assume that the small, very small fringe movement of extremists is going to like pollute the rest of the movement. You're not giving people credit. Like, people are aware of this. People are aware of the struggle for freedom, how much work it takes. And we need to really support that and see that as the real essence of what's going on. We need to be radiating love. This is really going to have to be a spiritual movement. It's always going to be that way. And even if you're like into Marxism, which I'm not, but I know in the Communist Manifesto that Karl Marx said, the essence of true communism, we've never seen anything like in the world because it's been absolutely distorted as a paradigm and weaponized. But the idea of just communing, living in community, Marx said, it's only going to happen when there's a spiritual revolution. We have to have a revolution on the level of our lovingness. We have to realize that we've been so divided, so played, so manipulated for so long. It's going to take some major healing to come together. And I personally see this Freedom Convoy as just like a brilliant starting point. It's uniting people from all walks of life. And they say this very openly, the organizers. They say they're just wanting to bring Canadians together. They don't want to bring this into any political creed, any political party. They just want to bring people together and let the unity itself start to outsource the next steps. And that's really what I'm seeing on the ground. So, I know it's like really intense and people are afraid, they don't see violence, they don't see hate. No one wants to see those things, okay? Except for the extremists. But don't focus on them alone, and wise up to the fact that the media is focusing on those elements for a very good reason. The media is working for the government. They're working for the corporations. They're working for all the agents in our civil society that are trying to keep us from being together. Because they know the biggest fear they have is that people are going to wake up and realize, oh my God, we don't need this political elite. We don't need this corporate elite. All we need is to come together in the power of love. This is what Jesus, all the great spiritual masters said. If we just unify and continue to forge that universal identity of being humanity, of being people of the earth, and then from there we can have all our beautiful cultural stylings. But we really need to come together in this transcendent way. And that's the part of the movement that I'm loving and that I want to amplify and that I want to really support. And just educate yourself. Like, follow POC for Freedom Convoy on Instagram. Follow and follow all the people that are posting there. Like, there's so many amazing diverse voices, minority voices, indigenous voices. Follow the people, watch the organizers and watch what they're trying to say. And yes, of course, watch the counterpoints too. Like that's, I'm not saying like we be naive. I'm not trying to create further polarization, but we have to have a very nuanced conversation of this. And I do feel these kinds of perspectives I'm sharing are disenfranchised. They're kept on the fringe uh, because the mainstream media, the waves that still so many people are watching, unfortunately, it's spewing a very distorted message. The real racists, the real white supremacists are our politicians, are the corporations. Like, look how they have handled every political issue regarding the indigenous, for example, and protecting our natural environment. So we need to wake up to that. Um, what else did I want to share on this? Um, yeah, I think that's about it. But I'm really hoping that a lot of good is going to come out of this. I know people's emotions run high, and it's very hard on social media to converse with each other without emotions getting into place. Every day we've got to be meditating and spending time like amplifying our ability to be clear thinking, clear feeling, beautiful beings. And we need more time in nature as well because we're so fragmented, you know? And people have been so decimated by the way our governments have responded to COVID. It's so clear the hypocrisy of all of them not following the rules. I mean, look what happened in the UK with Boris Johnson. Like, they almost had to resign because their government was partying the whole time with cocaine and alcohol. I mean, it's just like crazy. And when you see all the evidence coming in right now about like how these lockdowns were just not helping, and they've been decimating people, small businesses, decimating children. I shared an article a few weeks ago from a public school teacher in Ontario about just like the insane crisis with children that's happened with not being able to develop powers of empathy because everyone's wearing masks, to feeling like they're killing people, like 9-year-old children, like depressed and suicidal because they think they become murderers because of COVID. I mean, this is insane. This is insane. The amount is criminal at the level of our political parties. And if you watch that press conference, if you're on my Facebook wall and you watch the press conference of those three organizers, you'll see they're speaking directly to that. People have had enough. And I'm fully behind that. The government needs to be held intensely accountable for absolute ineptitudes and carrying on these mandates that are just useless at this point. So I hope that the truth will prevail and that we keep our cooler heads and our hearts open and continue radiating love. And the last thing I'll share is, if you really want to see the essence of this movement in my mind, look at the video that I posted last night of the Indigenous grandmother speaking about how this movement is about the one heart. It's very short. She just shares it very simply, but those are the ones that are trying to hold down the true energy of this. And we need to amplify those voices, and we need to get behind those and listen to them. She's probably got extraordinary teachings on how we can really live and embody one heart. That is not only this movement, that is the movement going forward for all of humanity. We have to embody the one heart. We have to embody a radical, universal form of love and raise it as our flag, and get everyone behind that and realize it's only through that genius power of love that the wisdom will then come forward on how to really start to architect the society and the civilization that we've all been dreaming for years, that utopian dream of everyone living in equality, thriving together, creating new systems of economics, sacred economics. It's all there. It's already in the ethers. We've just got to continue to dream it, activate it with each other. Interdependence. That's the way forward. I'm going to leave it there. I'm sending so much love from Costa Rica. I see the role that we're doing down here is we're starting to build, eco communities and eco centers to help with the healing and repairing of our relationship to Mother Earth. Because there's so many fronts to this mission right now, and that's what we're holding down here. So if you ever come down to Costa Rica, we're in the nascent stages, but later this year, we're already running a few events, but the plan is a long-term vision to create a beautiful eco-spiritual center to really, center voices of indigenous peoples and the voice of Mother Earth primarily, so that we can all repair and restore that relationship. That's, to me, the biggest thing that I've learned from all my indigenous elder teachers as I get tapped on the head by a beautiful tree, is that the true wisdom teacher is the earth. So if you want to know, like, what are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to go forward? Go out in nature and ask her first, and center her voice in your life, and truly feel that will change your life immensely. Sending you all so much love and glory, Buddha Vida, and